My children threw me in a nursing home like old trash, but they didn't know I still had a fight in me. Before you hear my story, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know where my friends are. Now let me tell you about the day my life changed. On the day they took me away, the sky was a gray color that felt heavy, like a bad feeling. I should have known something was wrong. Kevin called that morning, saying he and Deborah and Lola were coming to help me organize things. I should have known better. I sat at the kitchen table. It was the same table where I used to braid their hair, help with their math homework, and serve birthday cake. I even put out 4 coffee cups like it was a normal family meeting. I was so silly. I wore my blue polo shirt, the one Linda used to say made my eyes look nice. I remember looking at my tie and the toaster's shiny side. Isn't that funny? I wanted to look good for my kids. I still wanted them to love me. The door slammed too hard. Kevin came in first, looking busy and serious, with the tight face he always made when he was lying. Deborah followed, not looking up from her phone. Lola came last, holding some papers. I didn't like the look of them. "Dad," Kevin began, "we've been talking. That's how bad news always starts, right? When they're about to ruin your life." He spoke in a voice you'd use with a little kid. It was soft and spoke down to me. He said they found a wonderful place for me, a resort-style living facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It sounded like a commercial for a fancy spa. My heart pounded as I tried to understand. "I'm not going anywhere," I said calmly. "This is my home." Lola cleared his throat and pushed the papers across the table. "Dad, you've been forgetting things," he said. "We're just trying to protect you." Protect me from what? My own life? I wanted to yell and throw those papers back at them. But instead, I just looked at my hands. These were the same hands that had made their lunches, sewed their Halloween costumes, and held them when they were sick or had nightmares. These were the hands that worked 2 jobs after Linda died, just to keep a roof over our heads. "You already signed the power of attorney papers," Kevin said gently. That's when my legs felt weak. I didn't remember signing anything, but I had been very tired lately. There were times when the days all ran together, when I'd lost things. It was nothing dangerous, just small mistakes. I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they would use it against me. In less than an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me choose which photo frames to take. Just one suitcase. That house, my house, full of memories, hard work, and sadness. They took it all from me in one afternoon. The car ride to the nursing home was quiet. Deborah drove. Kevin sat next to her, tapping on his phone. Lola was in the back with me, but he never looked at me. Not even once. "Dad, you'll love it there," he mumbled. "They have bingo nights and movie screenings." I wanted to laugh or hit him. I did neither. We drove into a plain building complex between a gas station and a dry cleaner. There were no trees or gardens, just a parking lot and plain walls. A man in medical clothes came out with a clipboard. He smiled too much. That first night, I cried like a little kid. I put my pillow over my face to hide the sound. I cried not because of the room, or the cold sheets, or the food with no taste. I cried because they had stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was just a problem, a burden to be moved out of the way. But let me tell you something. I'm not the type of person to stay down. It took me a few weeks to stop being so angry. I stayed quiet and watched. I saw the staff, who were nice but worked too hard. I saw the other people living there, who looked like ghosts in sweaters, quiet friends waiting for life to end. But I also saw something else. I saw Roger. He was in the common room playing poker with a nurse, laughing loudly like a bad guy in an old movie. "You bet your lunch money on that hand, baby," he yelled, putting his cards down. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in weeks. He noticed. "You knew?" he asked, tilting his head. "You've got that look of someone who was just betrayed by their family." I laughed. I actually laughed. And just like that, Roger became my friend. Then came Dean. He was very sweet, but also very smart. He used to be a school librarian and noticed everything. Then there was Maxwell. He was tough and tall, with eyes that looked like he had seen it all and lived through it. It turned out he used to teach law at a college before a fall hurt his hip. We started sitting together at meals, then at games, and then late at night in the lounge drinking tea and sharing stories. One night, I told them what happened to me, about the betrayal and my house. Maxwell leaned back and raised an eyebrow. "Did you sign over the deed?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I think I still own it. Legally, Roger said, and let out a whistle. Honey, if that's true, you have money in your pocket and power in your hands. That's when it all began. The start of an idea, a small fire of rebellion in a place meant for people to give up. I wasn't just going to sit there and wait to die. If they thought they had thrown me away, they were about to learn who they had messed with. I was Arthur Frederick Wallace, a father, a man whose wife had passed away, a survivor, and I was about to change everything. It started with a drawer. My room at Whispering Pines Manor was small, just enough for a bed, a dresser, and a thin closet that smelled like medicine and gum. I had unpacked my one suitcase without feeling anything, until I opened the last drawer and found something in the corner. It was my old leather folder, where I kept important papers. My fingers shook as I unzipped it. Inside was the original deed to my house. It was still in my name, and still legal. There was no signature from Kevin, no stamp from a lawyer, just I sat down hard on the bed, the papers shaking on my lap. All the feelings I had kept inside, shame, heartbreak, anger, came back all at once. My children had planned to sell my house. They hadn't done it because they loved me or were worried about me. They wanted my home for themselves, probably to fix it up and sell it to a young couple for money. I held that deed like it was the last part of me they hadn't stolen. And for the first time since Linda's funeral, I prayed. Not for strength, not for peace. I prayed to know what to do, for a sign. And it came the next morning. Roger rushed into the dining hall wearing his lavender polo shirt with shiny buttons. Guess who's back from her son's wedding, he said. Maxwell, and he's got stories. That's how Maxwell came back to our group. He had been away for a week to go to his youngest son's wedding, and the way he rolled his eyes while pouring his coffee showed it didn't go well. The new wife is like a plastic doll, he grumbled. She wouldn't know a book if it hit her in the face. We laughed, but I was thinking about something else. I waited until breakfast was over, and the nurses were busy with the person who kept trying to flush magazines down the toilet. I pulled Maxwell aside. I need your help, I whispered. That afternoon, in Maxwell's private room, we spread the papers out on his desk. He looked at the deed, a copy of my will, and the medical power of attorney form that I now remembered signing after a bad fall last year. It was right after Kevin had come over with Chinese food and an urgent paper. You didn't sign over the house title, Maxwell confirmed, tapping his red nails on the paper. They have control over your medical choices. Sure, but the house is still yours. My heart pounded. Can they still sell it? I asked. They can try, but if you find out in time, no, he said. But if they fake your signature, he stopped talking. I clenched my teeth. Then I need to sell it first. He looked at me like I had just grown wings. You're serious? He asked. I want to sell my house. I want to take that money and get out of here. I want to live before I die, Maxwell? And then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. It took a few days to figure out the plans. We got Roger to help, who said he once dated a real estate agent and still had his number, even though the guy was probably bald and divorced by now. Dean helped us figure out how to use the nursing home's phones and set up an email account on the community center's computer. Maxwell made the real calls, the legal and money calls, and with every step I felt like I was waking up from a long, sleepy dream. Every time I walked past the nurse's station, I smiled. Every time Kevin called with his fake nice voice to check on me, I acted like a quiet father. I said I was thankful and that I didn't want visitors. But really, I was getting ready to leave. The house sold quickly. It turned out my neighborhood was a popular place for young families and people who worked in technology. The buyer offered the full price in just a few hours after it was listed. I didn't even have to meet them. The sale happened through Maxwell's old lawyer friend, Jack Winchester. He was a grumpy but very smart old man who still owed Maxwell a favor from a case. We sent the money to a new bank account in my name. Dean had helped me set it up online, using the nursing home's public Wi-Fi. It wasn't hard. Nobody thinks little old men are planning big changes, but the final step was the hardest. I had to disappear before they found out. We chose a Friday night. Most of the staff would be busy with bingo night, and Roger had given one of the young helpers cologne and pizza, so they would forget to check on my room. I had one small suitcase, my passport, a printed travel plan, and 3 one-way plane tickets. I left a single note on my pillow. "Don't look for me," it said. "I've gone to find the life you stole from me." Arthur, we rode in silence to the airport. The three of us were squeezed into a car with a broken air conditioner and a driver who didn't ask questions. The airport lights felt like a dream. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. Venice. That was our first stop. A place I had only seen in movies and dreamed about. Now it was real. As the plane took off, I looked out the window. The lights of Texas twinkled below, like the tears I wouldn't cry. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how long we would last or how far we would go, but I knew this much. They took everything from me. Now I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous man in the world. Venice smelled like fresh bread, old stone, and something sweet I couldn't name. Maybe it was freedom, maybe happiness, maybe revenge. It was my first time on a plane in over 20 years. My legs were cramped, my back ached, and I hadn't slept at all, but I couldn't stop smiling. Roger snored next to me the whole flight, his head bobbing like a bird. Dean held my hand during takeoff and whispered every prayer he knew in English and some old Latin. Maxwell read a detective book and drank tomato juice like we were on a vacation cruise, not running away on a mission to get my life back. We landed in the golden light of morning, with the city below looking like a dream you don't want to wake up from. There were streets with old uneven stones, flowers hanging from windows, and a man playing a violin by a fountain. I wanted to cry. We checked into a small guest house. It wasn't fancy, just clean beds, warm bread in the mornings, and a view of buildings covered in ivy that made you feel hopeful again. The person at the front desk didn't even blink when 4 old American men with very few suitcases walked in. I guess Venice has seen stranger things. That first day, we walked until our feet hurt. Roger argued with a street seller to get a better price for scarves we didn't need. Dean bought postcards and wrote one to his girlfriend from high school who had died 15 years ago. Maxwell flirted with a cafe owner named Lucy, who gave us a free dessert. And me, I stood in front of the Pantheon and let the wind blow on my face. I was nobody's burden. I was nobody's thrown-away father. I was Arthur Frederick Wallace, alive, but freedom has a way of bringing up old memories. On our third night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have, but I was curious. There were 10 messages from Kevin. The subject line of the newest one said, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear his voice in my head. He would be shocked, scared, and very angry. The house was gone. The money was gone. I was gone too. Maxwell found me on the balcony with my computer on my lap and a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched. He sat next to me, his knee touching mine. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't feel bad," I whispered, surprised by my own words. "I thought I'd feel guilty." He lit a cigarette, even though he wasn't supposed to. "They had a choice, Artie," he said. "They chose themselves. You just chose yourself back." The next day, we took a train to Florence. I had always wanted to see the Duomo church, standing inside that huge building, under a ceiling painted with heaven and hell. I thought about Linda, and the promises we made. I told her I would take care of the kids no matter what. I never thought I would need to protect myself from them. That night, I found the letters. We were staying in a small rental place with wallpaper that was peeling and a bed that made noises. I was unpacking my suitcase to find a lost sock. That's when I saw the folder. It was tucked into a side pocket I rarely used. It was a brown folder with Linda's handwriting on it. There were 6 letters, all written to me from a time that was 5 years before she died. I read them quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed while the city hummed outside. In them, Linda talked about the kids and how she had noticed their selfishness and how they tried to control things. She was worried about how they treated me when she wasn't around. She wrote about conversations with Lola that made her feel cold. He had even suggested that maybe it was time for me to move out, even when I was perfectly healthy. She had seen what was going to happen and didn't know how to stop it. And then came the last letter. It was written just a few weeks before her heart gave out. "Artie, if you're reading this, I hope to God I was wrong." It said, "But if they've turned on you, if you're alone, Please remember this. You are worth more than what they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back in whatever way you can. You've always been stronger than me. I cried like a baby. I held that letter to my chest and rocked back and forth on the bed. The pain and the love of it washed over me like fire. She knew. Even then, she knew. The next morning, I told the guys everything. Roger was the first to speak. Then we'll cause trouble, he said. Maxwell leaned in. I know a guy who still has friends in the news, he said. We tell your story, all of it. Dean nodded, his eyes wide. We go public, elder abuse, financial betrayal. You're not the only one, Artie. You could help others. And just like that, my quiet escape became a mission. We reached out to Jack Winchester again, who helped us write the story. He sent it to a journalist friend in New York, Martin Lewis. Martin had a popular online show and a lot of older men who wanted to hear the truth. In a few days, Martin called. He wanted to fly out to meet us. He said he had been looking for a story like this for years, and while we waited, we traveled. Lisbon, Nice, Naples, everywhere we went, we danced. We laughed, we took pictures that looked like they belonged in a calendar for tough grandfathers. And deep down, I knew I was changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was getting better. But as I stood on a beach in Belize, with the wind in my hair and the waves at my feet, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't know. I answered, thinking it was a hotel confirmation. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandpa. It was Eric, my youngest grandson. He was crying. I found you, he said. Please don't hang up. My heart stopped for a moment. Eric, I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Lola, I saw the letters. I saw the podcast. I just want to talk to you, please. And just like that, everything changed again. The past wasn't finished with me, but the future wasn't either. I didn't answer him right away. The call ended with a promise. I told Eric I needed time. I said I wasn't ready. My hand shook so much, I almost dropped the phone into the ocean. Roger had to take it from me and put it on the chair while I stood there, frozen, staring at the water. He sounded sincere, Dean whispered later that evening, as we sat on the roof of our guest house. The sky was colored with honey and blue as the sun set on another perfect day, and yet the past had come to find me again. This time, with the voice of a child I once put to sleep. He's still one of them, Maxwell said firmly. Don't let his soft voice fool you. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. Eric had been different. He was quiet and noticed things. He used to follow me around the garden when he was little, pulling weeds and asking questions about birds. I had saved her drawings and crayon letters. He was the only one who hadn't stopped calling me until Kevin cut me off from the grandkids completely. He was 16 now, almost a grown-up. Maybe he was old enough to see the truth. Or maybe this was another trick, another setup. 2 days later, I got a text message. Just a photo. It was my old house, but it didn't look like I remembered it. The front porch was empty. The rose bushes were gone. The shutters that Linda and I painted sky blue one summer were now a boring gray color. Below the photo, there was one message. They trashed it. I'm sorry. I stared at the photo for a long time. My throat felt tight, like I was being choked. They hadn't just sold my house. They had ruined it. They erased everything I had built. I showed the picture to the guys. Roger looked away. Dean's eyes filled with tears. Maxwell stared at it, then flicked his cigarette away. Time to go public, he said. The interview with Martin Lewis happened in a quiet cafe by the Tiber River.
He brought his recording equipment in a simple backpack and wore no makeup. He sat down with a kindness that felt like a hug and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the hard work, the long nights with 2 jobs, the birthdays I made special with very little money. I told him about the tricks, the lies, the betrayal that hurt me to my core. I told him about the night they took me from my home like I was a piece of furniture that didn't fit anymore. When I finished, Martin took my hand and said, "You are not alone. You have no idea how many men have written me with stories like this, but yours is going to open us." He aired the podcast a week later. It became very popular.
There were hundreds of thousands of downloads, messages from men all over the country who had been betrayed the same way. There were also messages from sons who felt bad about what they did, and daughters who had watched their fathers become quiet and sad. I became a symbol, not because I wanted to, but because I had lived through it. Kevin sent me a message the next day. "How dare you," it said. Lola tried calling twice. Deborah left a message that was full of angry and threatening words. I deleted them all. But then Eric emailed me. He said he had left home and was staying with his aunt. He said he couldn't look at his mother anymore without hearing my story in his head. He wanted to meet, not in Texas. "Anywhere," he wrote. "Please," he wrote, "I just want to know you again." Maxwell warned me not to. Roger was not sure. Dean squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes getting better means opening a door, just one more time." So I picked the place. Charleston, South Carolina, a city that smelled like flowers and old memories. It had always been on my list of places to see. We flew in the next week. Eric was waiting in Forsyth Park, sitting on a bench under a big tree. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes wide, already full of tears. He looked like his mother used to, before Kevin became cold. But there was something else in Eric's face. Something real, something searching. "Hi, Grandpa," he said. My voice almost didn't work. "Hi, sweetheart." We walked for hours. He asked questions about Linda, my childhood, and the day they took me. He told me he had found the letters by accident, while looking for his birth certificate in Kevin's files. He told me he faced them, and that Kevin hit him. "I couldn't stay after that," he whispered. I looked at him, this young man, still half a boy, and something inside me broke open. I didn't want to carry the anger anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to fix things. Not for them, for me. I hugged him so tightly. I think I left marks on his spirit. When I returned to the guys that night, I told them everything. Roger wiped away a tear. Dean smiled softly. Maxwell said, "Well, damn, guess there's hope for at least one of them." We spent another week in Charleston. Eric joined us for dinners, for walks by the water, and for stories under the stars. It was strange at first, then it became wonderful, like learning to breathe again after being underwater for a long time. One night, he turned to me and said, "What if we started something like a place for men like you, like us?" I didn't answer right away, but the next morning, over coffee and a southern breakfast, I said, "We're going to build it." I didn't know how yet, but I had the money. I had the name, the Arthur Frederick Foundation, and I had a grandson who was ready to fight with me instead of against me. The past was a hurt, but the future, oh, the future was a fire just waiting to start. The Arthur Frederick Foundation started as an idea written on a napkin during a pancake breakfast. Eric had drawn little stars around the name. His handwriting was still shaky and unsure like a child's. Mine was firm and strong, unbending from all the hard things in life. We didn't know where to begin, but we had a goal to protect men like me. Fathers, grandfathers, widowers, men who had been erased, silenced, used, and left behind by the very people they gave everything to. It wasn't just about money. It was about pride and respect. Eric took the lead. He had a smart mind and a passion that reminded me of Linda. He helped register the foundation, build the website, and write the words for the main page. He contacted people who help old people and legal experts. He set up a fundraising page online, and it became very popular. Hundreds of men wrote to us, sharing their stories, and thousands of others gave money with messages like, "This happened to my dad. Thank you for speaking up." I thought I was alone. We started small. A first program in Charleston, a free legal clinic once a week, information packets sent to men in nursing homes, support groups held online. My name on the website felt strange, like it belonged to someone I used to know but hadn't fully met until now. Meanwhile, the news kept calling. A big magazine, a TV channel, and a radio show. They wanted my story, but I said no to most of them. I wasn't a show to watch. I wasn't a trend. I was a man who had lived through a hard time and built something to mess. I didn't want attention. I wanted to make a difference, but I did agree to one interview with a local Charleston news station. The reporter, a man my age named Lawrence, asked me gently at the end, If you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be? I looked at the camera. My voice was steady. I forgive you, I said, but I'll never forget who I became because of you. That video clip was seen everywhere. Kevin saw it. He left me a voicemail after 6 months of not talking. I never listened to it. I didn't need to. Whatever he had to say, he had many years to say it before. That part of my life was over. Lola tried to sue me, claiming I stole the house from them. The judge threw out the case in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even go in person. Maxwell did, and from what I heard, he made them look terrible in his final words to the court. Deborah moved away. I haven't heard from her since. And that's fine with me. And Eric, he became my helper in my life. He traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in Virginia. It was a nice 5-bed house where men could live safely after being hurt or ignored by their family. We named the home Wallace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees felt weak. Roger had to hold me up. Speaking of Roger, he met someone.
Yes, that Roger.
It happened on a cruise ship we all took the next spring. His name was Diana, a man whose wife had passed away, a bad dancer, and he was great with chocolate drinks. He said she made him laugh like no one else ever had. They now spend half the year in Florida, arguing over a game and pretending they aren't completely in love. Dean started a poetry blog that became popular with a lot of people. He writes about sadness and getting better. And every story ends with a line just for me. And still Arthur rises. Oh, Maxwell. He is our legal leader now. He talks in court like he was born there. He wears red lipstick every day and says it's like a shield. And me, I'm still traveling, still telling my story, still fighting. The last thing I did before the year ended was visit my old house. Not to face them, not to feel sad, just to see it. It had been painted again. The porch was redone. New owners, a young couple with a baby swing out front. I stood across the street, not noticed, just an old man in sunglasses and a hat. As I smiled, that house wasn't my home anymore. Home was wherever I was true to myself, wherever men came together to help each other, wherever Arthur Frederick Wallace refused to be forgotten. And as I walked away, a soft wind blew through the street, carrying the smell of roses from somewhere close by. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost feel Linda's hand in mine. We did it, I whispered. We made it. And in that quiet, special moment, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The cruise ship was like a floating castle, white and shiny against the blue water with gold letters on the side. Celestial Dawn. We got on the ship in Portland, under a cover of cherry blossoms. The petals floated in the wind like a good luck charm. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings. It was our prize, our celebration. One last promise kept before the next part of our lives began. I stood on the top deck with Roger, Dean, and Maxwell as the ship moved away from the land. Eric was below in the room, finishing a computer meeting for the foundation. He was leading a project to get money to open 3 more homes in the middle of the country. He had grown into a strong, wonderful version of himself, and I thank God every day that he had found his way back to me. And to himself. Can you believe we're doing this? Dean asked, his hair wrapped in a flowered scarf that blew in the wind. We should have done this 30 years ago, Roger said, sipping a drink and laughing. But hey, late is better than never. Maxwell pointed toward the far-off line where the sky and water meet. Look at that sky, he said. I want to paint it with a drink in my hand. We all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that feels like air in your lungs after you almost drowned. That night, we wore our best clothes and had dinner in the ship's large room. The lights were soft and warm. The chairs were soft velvet. The forks and knives were heavier than they needed to be, and the waiters smiled like they were part of a big, fancy joke. Halfway through dessert, a chocolate cake with raspberry sauce. The band began to play. It wasn't loud or flashy, just the soft sounds of an old song, and something inside me happened. I stood up. I want to dance, I said. For the first time in years, I want to dance. Maxwell raised his eyebrows. Roger beamed with a big smile. Dean clapped softly, already reaching for his camera. There was no one to dance with. No partner waiting for me. Just me in a blue suit, I bought on a sudden idea with shoes that hurt my feet and a heart that was too full, but I walked out there anyway. The band watched me. The other people looked up, and I closed my eyes and I danced. I moved slowly and gracefully to music that felt like a memory. I danced for every night I cried alone, for every holiday my children forgot, for every man who sat in a plain room and wondered if his haze was already over. I danced for Linda, for Eric, for myself. At some point, I felt arms around me. Someone had stepped onto the floor. Strong, steady hands guided mine. I opened my eyes. It was Diana, Roger's friend, smiling gently. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. More people joined us, older couples, people dancing alone, a small group of strangers moving together under the fancy lights. We danced, not like we were young again, but like we had finally remembered who we were. The music became slower. The final note lasted for a moment, and then came the clapping. Not loud or flashy, just warm, deep and real. Back at the table, Eric had joined the guys. He stood and opened his arms as I walked toward him. "You looked like you were flying," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I was," I said. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else. Later that night, we stood on the balcony outside our room. The sea stretched on forever, moonlight sparkling on the water. The northern lights began to show up, green and purple waves moving in the dark. We watched quietly for a long time. "Do you ever miss them?" Eric asked softly. "My children?" I asked. He nodded. I took a breath. "I miss who I thought they were. I miss the hope, but not the pain." He nodded, resting his head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry they hurt you." I kissed the top of his head. "You didn't, and you're helping fix what they broke. That's more than I ever dreamed." The sky danced for us. The water whispered of new starts. And I stood there, not as a victim, not even as a survivor. I was Arthur Frederick Wallace, a father, a grandfather, a founder, a fighter. And in that moment, I knew I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. We reached Skagway just as the sun began to set behind the icy mountaintops, making the front of the ship golden. The harbor was quiet, with gentle waves hitting the dock as we stepped onto the ground, wrapped in warm clothes. The cold air made our breath look like smoke. The others decided to look at the stores and eye some crab. Eric and I, though, took a different path. We booked a small helicopter tour, something we'd never done before. Neither of us liked heights, but that was the reason we did it. "I want to see the world from the top," I told him. For once, the pilot, a man named Stan with a rough voice and the calm of someone who had seen bad storms up close, helped us into our seats. Eric held my hand as the spinning parts began to turn. I smiled like a silly person. We went up into the sky, and the world below began to get smaller. Skagway became a tiny town in a snow globe. The mountains opened up, huge and white and wild. The glaciers looked like shiny rivers of old glass. We hovered over one of the biggest glaciers. The sun came out from behind the clouds, making the ice look almost holy. I had never seen anything so big, so untouched. It made me feel small, but in a good way, a way that made me feel amazed, as if everything I had gone through was just getting me ready for this moment. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Eric said softly over the headphones. I turned to him, tears in my eyes. "I almost did, you know, but then you called." He squeezed my hand. "I think you saved me too." We landed on a flat patch of ice, wrapped in blankets as we stepped out into the cold air. It was just us and the quiet of the snow, the kind that makes everything quiet. Pain, memories, fear. I took out the last letter Linda had written, the one I had carried with me all this time, and I let it go. I watched it float across the ice, carried by the wind with no weight. It fluttered, spun, and disappeared into the white. It was time to stop carrying the heavy feelings. Later that night, we went back to the ship and found the others waiting with a special drink. "To Arthur," Roger said, holding his glass high. "The toughest man I've ever met." "To Grace," said Dean. "In every form it comes in. To second chances," Maxwell added, and winked, and Eric leaned in, clinking his glass gently to mine. to beginnings. We drank under the stars, wrapped in blankets, and love. Laughter echoed across the deck, carried by the sea. And when I closed my eyes that night, I dreamed not of the past, but of all the new mornings still to come. Not as a forgotten father, not as a man who was thrown away, but as Arthur Frederick Wallace, made new, fixed, and finally completely free. The last morning of the cruise came wrapped in fog, in a quiet calmness. It was the kind of calm that makes you feel like the world is stopping just for a moment, so you can say goodbye. I stood at the side of the ship, with coffee in my hand, watching the coast of Glacier Bay disappear behind us. I thought I would feel sad, but I didn't. I felt full. Eric joined me, still in his pajamas and a wool scarf wrapped messily around his neck. "Today feels different," he said. "It is," I replied. "It's the last day of running." He looked confused. "Running from what?" I turned to face him fully. "From sadness, from guilt, from everything I thought I failed to be." His eyes became soft. "You didn't fail, Grandpa," he said. "They did." I smiled gently. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't want my life to be known by what others did to me. I want it to be known by what I chose to do anyway." After breakfast, we had a small ceremony, just the five of us. We met in a private room, away from the crowds. There was no stage or long talks, just stories. We took turns sharing the names of men we had known who were lost to silence, who were thrown away or forgotten. Roger spoke of his brother. Dean read a poem he had written the night before. Maxwell lit 5 candles, one for each of us, and one for every man we had met on our journey who never got to live freely. And I told the story of my life. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the parts I had found again. Planting tomatoes with Linda, holding babies on the front porch, dancing without shoes in the kitchen to old music. I told them about my first kiss, the time I got a ride across the state with my best friend when I was 17. The Christmas I surprised the kids with a puppy. I told them about the fire inside me, and I told them how, for years, I let others pour water on it. "But here's the thing about fire," I said, my voice steady. "If you protect the small flame long enough, it will burn again." We each took our candle and set it floating in a glass bowl, watching the flames move on the water. I looked around at the men who saved me, who reminded me who I was, and at Eric, my future. "I'm going home," I said softly. 4 heads turned to me. "I'm not going back to Texas," I made clear, "but I'm building something that will last. A real place, a main office for the foundation, a place for men to rest, a home for any man who needs one." Maxwell smiled. "Where?" he asked. I took a breath. Where it all began. Charleston. They all nodded. It made sense. It always had. 6 months later, Wallace Haven opened its doors. It was a white, 2-story house with green shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around it like open arms. We built it with money given to us, with love, and with the strong will of men who refused to be erased. Eric became the main leader. Roger and Diana hosted a dinner club once a month. Dean led writing workshops. Maxwell gave free legal advice every Friday. And me? I sat on that porch every morning with a cup of coffee and watched the Verd come to us. Men arrived with shaking hands and sad stories, and they left with light in their eyes. Sometimes I told my story. Other times I just listened, because I had learned something important. Sometimes the best way to fix things isn't just surviving what they did to you. It's choosing to become someone they never expected you to be. Someone stronger, someone free, someone who can't be forgotten. My name is Arthur Frederick Wallace, and this is what I leave behind. Not in buildings, not in money, but in the fire I passed on, and the men who now carry it forward. It was our first Thanksgiving at Wallace Haven. The sun streamed through the big windows, making the wooden floors look golden. The air smelled like cinnamon, cooked turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, the leaves had just started to fall. Reds and oranges covered the lawn, crunching under every step. There were wind chimes on the porch, whispering old memories into the wind. Inside, there was laughter, real laughter, the kind that comes from deep down, not just to be polite. The long dining table, given by a man whose husband once told him he wasn't good enough to have guests, was now covered in different plates and silverware. Candles flickered between the serving dishes. Around it sat 22 men. Some wore nice clothes. Others wore jeans. All of them had hope on their faces. Wallace Haven had been open for just 3 months, and we had already changed lives. There was Oliver, who got out of a marriage that made him silent for 35 years. There was Harold, who was left without a home after his grown son took all his savings and disappeared. There was Rowan, who at 71 finally learned to read, and now left notes around the house with words he loved. Light, soft, beginning. I sat at the head of the table, not because I wanted to, but because the others insisted. They said I was the reason they were there, but I looked around and knew the truth. They were the reason I was whole again. I stood to give a toast, not a speech, just a few words. I raised my glass, which had apple juice with a little whiskey in it, just how Linda used to make it. This year, I began, I didn't lose everything. The room became quiet. I found everything I was missing. I looked around at Roger and Diana sitting side by side with their hands together, at Maxwell cutting the turkey like he was in charge of a court, at Dean giving out his homemade apple pie and handing napkins to a man with tears in his eyes, at Eric, my grandson, the strongest, kindest person I had ever known, standing behind me like a guiding light. I found myself, I said, my voice shaking. I found family, not by blood, but by choice. I found a reason to live in the pain, and I want you all to know this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for those who are rising. The room was filled with the sound of glasses clinking, soft crying and clapping that felt like music just for us. Later, as the sun went down and the candles flickered, I walked out to the porch. Eric joined me. You never told me what you wished for, he said, touching my shoulder. What do you mean? I asked. That night in Glacier Bay, he said, when you let Linda's letter go, what did you wish for? I smiled. I wished, I said, that someday someone would know me for who I really was. And now, I wish that someone else will see how much they are worth before it's too late. He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder. You're changing the world, Grandpa. No, baby, I whispered. We are. And we sat there, 2 people with fire in our souls, watching the stars appear one by one, like tiny promises in the sky. Winter came gently to Charleston. Unlike the sharp cold I remembered from Texas winters, here it was like a quiet, soft feeling. There were crisp mornings, the smell of pine and cloves in the air, soft blankets, and slower walks under gray skies. Wallace Haven was lit up with string lights and small miracles. Each room now held a story. One belonged to Clark, who came with only a suitcase and a picture of his dead wife. His children had emptied his bank account and left him in a hotel. He didn't talk much at first, but after a few weeks in our garden, his hands found their way back to the earth and to his voice. Another room belonged to Nathaniel, a former nurse who had been put in a care home against his will. He taught yoga in the morning now, sitting in a chair, leading breathing exercises for men whose hearts were still learning to trust again. Every time someone new arrived, I saw myself, a reflection of who I was that day, in the plain nursing home with my suitcase at my feet, and my belief in life slipping away. And each time I welcomed him in, I grew stronger. In January, we held a special meeting. Our first night of names. It was Dean's idea, and it was beautiful. We each stood in a circle, holding a small candle, and said the name of a man we wanted to honor. A father, a friend, a part of ourselves we had left behind. When it was my turn, I said simply, Arthur Frederick Wallace, the one who stayed too quiet for too long, and I let that silence last for a moment. Not because I was sad, but out of respect. That man, that version of me, deserved to be remembered too. He kept going when no one thanked him. He loved even when it hurt, and he finally stood up when it mattered most. After the ceremony, Eric found me in the kitchen, tears on his face. I want to write a book, he said, about you, about all of this. I laughed. You think people would want to read about a grandpa who sold his house from under his kids and ran off to Italy with a group of old troublemakers? Yes, he said, very serious. Because they are out there, Grandpa, all the men who feel trapped, who think it's too late. I want them to know it's never too late. That night, I started writing notes in a notebook. Memories, lessons, truths. No one teaches you until it's almost too late. I didn't know if it would become a book or an online diary or a box of letters for the next generation. But I knew one thing. My voice wasn't going to be quiet again. February brought news we didn't expect. The foundation was nominated for a big award, the Men of Strength Legacy Grant. It was given to groups that helped older men feel important, in control of their own lives, and heard. Maxwell read the email out loud in the main room. Roger screamed. Dean cried. Eric danced me around the coffee table. A week later, the local news team came back to film a story. This time, they didn't just interview me. They interviewed all of us, the men of Wallace Haven. Each one shared his story, and the camera caught something that words couldn't fully explain. Their strength. When the story aired, we got over 3,000 emails in 2 days. 3,000 men asking for help. Sons trying to help their fathers. Grandfathers asking if there was a Wallace Haven near them. We were overwhelmed, and then we were determined. We began to grow. Another home opened in Bristol, one more in Ohio, and a third planned for Washington in the fall. And through it all, I kept my morning habit. Coffee on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a quiet prayer on my lips, not for what was right anymore, but for happiness, for the life I never thought I'd get to live. And every so often, I'd see a man walk up our path for the first time, with his shoulders low and his eyes guarded. And I'd get up to meet him. I'd take his hand, and I'd whisper just loud enough for his heart to hear, "You're not lost. You're just getting started." Spring came early that year, as if even the plants were impatient for more life. Wallace Haven was covered in flowers. The flowers climbed around the porch railings, and yellow flowers burst from the garden like little trumpets of hope. Everything smelled fresh, alive, like the world had turned a new page, and I, Arthur Frederick Wallace, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Eric's book idea had become real. We called it Not Done Yet. He had taken my stories, my letters, and parts of the men I'd met, and turned them into something more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just my story. It was a promise, a statement. We launched it with a party in the garden right here at Wallace Haven. We invited every man who had ever come through our doors and their families. Yes, even some of the children who had once been the reason they came to us in the first place. People do change. Not all, but some. Enough to give you a little more faith in this world. Kevin didn't come. Deborah didn't write. Lola sent a bitter message through a lawyer saying the book made him look bad. We didn't reply, but Eric's parents came and they brought flowers. "Thank you," his father said to me, in a low voice, "for giving him back to us stronger." That night, after the guests had gone, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same mug, same stars above, and I finally let myself remember everything. Not just the pain, but the love, too. Linda, the babies I held, the home I once had, the quiet I went through, the fight I found, and the legacy I had built with my bare, hurt hands. Maxwell joined me, with a blanket over his lap. Roger and Diana waved goodnight from their small house across the garden. Dean was already inside working on a new poem about getting your life back. Maxwell touched my arm. "You did it, you know." "Did what?" I asked. "You rewrote the ending." I looked at him, my eyes soft with the think of peace that only comes after the storm. "No," I whispered. "I just started telling the truth." He chuckled. That rough, honest laugh that had gotten us through the worst of it. And in that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be chosen, not to be heard, not to be seen. I was here, fully. And for every man who had ever felt small, who had ever been pushed aside or silenced or forgotten, I left these words. Not carved in stone, but in the hearts of everyone we touched. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet. And neither was I. The day the award letter came, I was making lemon bars in the kitchen with Eric. The sunlight poured through the windows, warm and sweet, catching the dust in the air. We were laughing. We were laughing about something silly Roger had said the day before. How his fake teeth had flown across the table during a game. And then the mail came. It wasn't fancy. Just a cream-colored envelope with our names typed on the front. Arthur F. Wallace and Eric G. Weston. The Arthur Frederick Foundation. Eric opened it first, his hands shook, and he passed it to me without a word. I took it, my heart feeling slow and heavy, and read, "Congratulations. You have been given the Men of Strength Legacy Grant in thanks for your hard work, helping men who are older and giving back pride to those who have been forgotten for too long. We honor you with money to continue and grow your mission for a lifetime." I sank into the nearest chair, not because of the money, though I knew it would help us build 3 more Wallace Havens by the end of the year. It was the words, "We honor you." No one had ever said that to me before. Eric knelt beside me, his face glowing. "You did this," he said. "You made this world." "No," I whispered. "We made it together." We had a party the next weekend. Not just for the grant, but for the lives we had helped fix. Over 100 men gathered in the garden. Some were in wheelchairs. Some used walkers. Some had gray braids and lipstick. Some had stories written in the lines around their eyes. There were hugs and people meeting again, songs sung not in tune, and talks given through tears. They put a wreath of flowers on my head that Roger had made himself. It was a silly thing, really, made of daisies and ivy, but I wore it like a king, because for the first time I understood what being royalty really meant. It wasn't about being in charge. It was about rising up. That night, after the last light had been turned down and the guests had gone to sleep, I sat in my room alone. The award paper was on the table next to me. Next to it was Linda's last letter, the one I had copied and put in a frame. It was in the corner with a photo of us from our wedding day, young, with bright eyes, completely unaware of the future, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to her out loud. "I did it, Linda. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew." My voice broke, but I wasn't alone. A soft knock on the door stopped me. Eric peeked in. "Sorry," he said. "Just wanted to say good night." "Come sit," I said, patting the bed next to me. He curled up like he used to when he was little, his head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," I told him. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "You turned sadness into light." We sat there. No need for more word. The quiet between us was full of everything special. And when he finally left, I stood at the window, looking out over the garden where so many had gotten better, where I had gotten better, and I realized something. This wasn't a second chance at life. It was life, the one I had always deserved. And with the moon shining above and spring filling the air, I closed my eyes and smiled, because I had finally come home. Not to a house, but to myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your story matters to us.